Hey guys, how's it going? We have Cassie Webb with Mississippi Elevate Real Estate, and I'm Heather Kusiba with Windermere out of Washington. And last week we spent a little bit of time getting to know each other, and one of the topics that came up is actually Cassie's specialty of working with distressed properties. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about distressed properties and just kind of like a great overview of it. So I'm very excited to learn more about it from the specialist herself.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have actually, so I went into full-time real estate in 2009. So I had my license for a few years prior, but I could, if you will, cut my teeth on distressed properties because that's pretty much what there was in 2009 and 2010. So for distressed properties can mean different things to different people, but for today's purposes, we're primarily just going to talk about people who generally are in financial distress. Now, sometimes you have distressed properties because someone is maybe like a tired landlord or something, and it's not necessarily financial, but it's just like they're just kind of done with the property. So that can be a great area of opportunity. But for today's purposes, distressed properties, we're going to talk about short sales, foreclosures, people who are potentially going into foreclosure, and things like that. And so on the, I always like anytime I talk about this topic, and we kind of mentioned this the other day, anytime we're talking on this topic, I like to tell people if you or someone you know is ever in danger of losing their home, or may even possibly be at some point in danger of losing their home, reach out to me because I've got a lot of resources and things like that. So, but one option, of course, is for people to sell their properties. And a lot of times people don't know, especially in the last few years, and even some agents, that if someone is upside down on their house, meaning they owe more than it is worth, then you still have potentially the option for working with the bank and getting your house sold without having to come out of pocket for that money. And so sometimes there's a misconception that, like, oh, I just bought my house not very long ago, or maybe the market hasn't been friendly to me. And with commission and everything, I just can't afford to sell it, but I also can't afford to continue making the payments. So that would be a short sale. Sometimes people get that confused, short and quick. They're not quick. Typically. Okay, so a short sale means that you are accepting short of, the bank is willing to accept short of what is owed. But the sale part is typically long because you've got a lot of kind of red tape and things like that. So it's not something you've got, the bank has to approve the sale. And that's something that I work hand in hand with my sellers through that process. So it's not something that a homeowner has to go through alone. But it is something that, may be an option for people. And then sometimes, whether that's the case or maybe they have equity, people have different things happen financially. So there is, depending on the state, every, different states have different guidelines, but regardless, if someone stops making their payment and they're headed towards foreclosure, we would typically call that a pre-foreclosure. And there are definitely options for homeowners in that situation. And then there are foreclosures. Once the bank actually has the auction and auctions and satisfies the lien, then they become bank owned or REO, real estate owned properties. And unfortunately, at that point, depending on the state, there may or may not be a redemption period. In our state, there's no redemption period. So that's at the, literally that day is when that the homeowner is really kind of out of the process, at least in our state. But I also help investors with all of these different types of properties. as well as they can be a great opportunity for homeowners, especially a lot of times first-time home buyers. Many times these properties need a little sprucing up, because the person may have not had the finances to maintain it, or they may have just kind of thrown their hands up at some point and it has some deferred maintenance and things. But there's a lot of options where you can get in a house more affordable, and sometimes even with promotional financing, $100 down financing. Sometimes you can even get them with no down payment if you'll be living in it. And then investors as well, like I said. And then sometimes if someone really needs to sell very, very quickly, I can connect them with an investor that can close super quick as well. And it's kind of a win-win for everybody. So that's the bird's eye view.
It's definitely a lot of information that a lot of people aren't very familiar with. Even like you said, like a lot of agents aren't even familiar with the ins and outs of distressed properties. So it's really cool that that's kind of become your thing. And we've talked a little bit about it before in your experience and one of your projects that you're going through now that we're going to be talking about in a future episode. And it's just super fascinating. But one question I did have for you though, so you did say that the typical closing process for a distressed property tends to be a lot longer than a regular closing process. Can you give us kind of an idea of what that generally means? Like what is a typical closing time versus a distressed property rough closing time?
Yes. So it's every market is different, I'm sure. In our market, typically it's a 30 to 45 day close if you're financing the property. If it's cash, a lot of times you can close, potentially within a week. So it's really on after the foreclosure or pre-foreclosure, it really is going to follow the same timelines as a conventional standard sale. The difference is on specifically the short sales. The short sales, it's really it's going to depend on your bank, because we haven't had a lot of short sales because equity has been increasing so rapidly. You could almost buy a house yesterday and sell it tomorrow and not be upside down, right? And so because the last few years that the housing market has been appreciating so quickly, it's something that a lot of lenders they don't necessarily have the manpower or the processes and procedures in place yet, some of them, and the decision making and things like that. So if you're depending on the lender, it could be relatively the same timeline. However, if they're still kind of figuring it out and bringing on people to help with that, I would say it could take 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
For the closing. And unfortunately, that's really not something that you're going to know until you reach out to the bank and ask what their systems and processes are. This is because real estate is so foundational to our economy in the US. There's always going to be a lot of government regulations and guidelines and things. So if nothing else, if someone finds themselves in a situation where they're not going to continue to be able to make their mortgage payment, if you don't do anything else, call your mortgage lender, and they're going to have a process in place. They're probably going to have a packet on standby that they can mail to you or email to you, and you'll fill out an application, just kind of a little background on what's going on and what your potential hardship is and things like that. And then they'll give you options. And many times they can even work out an option where the homeowner, if they want to figure out a way to be able to get caught up and afford it, then they may have options where you can actually continue to live in the home and get a loan modification or something like that. So it's very important that people reach out to their lender. And in that, if short sale is something that you're wanting to consider, then you can ask your lender if there is a guideline, I'm sorry, kind of what to expect as far as the timeline if you're approved for a short sale.
Yeah.
The key thing is the lender does have to approve the short sale because they have to approve that they're gonna take a loss.
Yeah.
It's to their advantage to do that because it can cost a lot of money for them to have to go through the foreclosure process. So that's why the lenders sometimes will consider that, because if you're not going to be able to afford it either way, it can be to their advantage as well to do the short sale and avoid foreclosure. So.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely a very interesting and fairly a bit more complicated process, it sounds like. But if you have the right resources on your side, it sounds like you're hopefully set for success, which is why, especially if you're in Mississippi, it sounds like Cassie, you're the one to talk to.
Yeah, well, it is a little more specifically, again, the short sale is where it gets a little confusing because, a little more complicated because you're bringing in a third party decision maker. Yeah. So if someone is facing foreclosure, but they have equity in the property, they have full control to transfer that ownership right up until, assuming they can clear all their liens and provide clear title and everything. They have the right to sell that all the way up to the time of the auction. So, and they're the sole decision maker, just like if it were a regular sale, they have that option. But with the short sale, because you're asking the bank to take a loss, then that's where now you're having to get approval from people other than yourself.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So
very cool.
Yeah, and then also on the purchase side, if someone says that they're interested in buying a distressed property, we do that's a whole nother thing that we won't get into today. But we talk a little more in depth about the different kinds of distressed properties, what may work for their situation. And even, there's different types of foreclosures and things like that. But I have personally bought and helped people buy houses that were in pre-foreclosure, short sales, that were already foreclosed on, REO properties, estate sales in bankruptcy, every kind of thing imaginable. So it's definitely something though that we will definitely talk about, like for their specific situation and what may or may not work for them and their goals and timelines and how much work they're wanting to put in and things like that. Occasionally you find a beautiful, perfect, everything is well maintained and perfect distressed property. So it's not always that it's going to be a ton of work or anything like that. So that's something I think another kind of common misconception is, like, if you buy a distressed property, you're going to get something in shambles, and that is definitely not always the case. So
yeah, definitely. Well, very cool. Thank you, Cassie, for sharing your knowledge on that. That's incredibly useful for, I know, a lot of people, both agents and people who might be thinking about purchasing one, or if they're under on their mortgage as well, and what kind of options they have. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if anyone ever has questions, definitely they can reach out to us. And I know even if they're outside of our states, we have referral partners, and we'll make sure, whether you're looking to purchase a distressed property or whether you may be a homeowner in distress, in a distressful situation or underwater on your house or whatever the case may be, we're going to make sure that we connect you with an agent that has experience and can help guide you through that process. So definitely reach out to one of us if you're ever find yourself in that situation or know someone who is.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Well, Again, thank you. So next week, by the way, to shift gears a little bit, we're going to go over January stats, which I don't know about you guys, but we've seen a little bit of an interesting shift on our market locally in the
Mhm.
past month or so. So I'm excited to see what those stats end up saying. And then the week after, we're actually going to get into a little bit more about distressed properties with you. So it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited. We're kind of our format is we're kind of doing a little bit of an
Mhm,
overview and then kind of deep diving into some
mhm.
different things. So we're going to talk about that and renovations and renovations and new construction
Mhm.
and all kinds of fun stuff. So we will be seeing you guys soon.
Yep.